If you ask someone to describe New York City, they'll probably talk about ambition, towering skyscrapers, the endless rush of opportunity. They talk about the destination.
They describe the polished surface, sure, but the source material we are diving into today,
Mm,
it's excerpts from a work called The Crime Ledger, A Dark History of New York. It just strips that veneer away entirely.
right.
It argues that to really understand the modern city, you have to look at its foundation.
Yeah.
And it's not pretty.
No, it doesn't pull any punches at all. It claims this global symbol of power wasn't fundamentally built on dreams. It was built, and I'm quoting here, on blood, crime, greed, and survival. I mean, that's an incredibly aggressive thesis.
It is, but it's backed by a deep, dark trajectory. And our mission today is to trace that history right from the very beginning, to show you, our listener, how crime and corruption weren't just incidental problems.
They were the building blocks.
Exactly, the foundational primary building blocks. This deep dive is your shortcut to understanding that hidden history.
And you have to start where every city starts, with the land itself. Long before it was New York, it was Manhattan. It belonged to the Lenape Native Americans. And seeing the account of the very first official transaction is, well, it's staggering.
What's so fascinating about that initial transaction in 1626 isn't just the price. The Dutch settlers took Manhattan for a cited value of just $24.
$24.
But the real story is the precedent it set. The Lenape were pushed out, and their claim to the land was just erased. The first foundational act of the city was outright systemic theft. Formalized, normalized.
Sets the stage immediately. This idea that property rights belong to the powerful and that the city's identity would forever be entwined with taking, not creating.
And that greed, it immediately fueled the economic engine of New Amsterdam, as the Dutch called it.
Yeah.
This wasn't a community founded on, say, religious freedom like some other colonies.
No.
It was a corporation designed purely for profit, centered on the fur trade.
And that focus on rapid profit defined everything, right? It required a labor source that was cheap, dependable, and expandable. The source material really highlights this period, noting that from the start, human beings were treated as assets. Lives were currency.
Precisely. The establishment of slavery was central to the colony's whole economic calculus. Slaves weren't just used for manual labor, they were a form of capital, traded, leveraged in property deals. The entire system was built into the physical and financial structure of the city.
So when the British seize control in 1664 and rename it New York, what happens to that foundation? Does the moral calculus change with the new rulers?
Not at all. The source material is very clear on this. Only the names on the door changed. The British inherited that whole infrastructure of exploitation, and they found it immensely profitable, so they deepened it.
And this is where that history becomes truly sobering, a chapter a lot of books just kind of gloss over. New York, in the 1700s, was one of the largest slave-holding cities in America. We always think of southern plantations, but the source makes it so clear. Northern commerce was just as reliant on this brutal system.
Think about this for a moment. During the 1700s, the sources indicate that an astonishing 1 out of every 5 residents in New York City was enslaved.
1 in 5. That's
It
chilling.
wasn't a hidden industry. It was a deeply integrated public reality.
And to maintain a system like that, you need incredible overt violence. Public executions were common for any perceived transgression. And the city's reaction to rebellions was swift and crushingly violent. Fear wasn't a byproduct. It was the mechanism of control.
Right. If you connect all these dots, the theft of the land, the exploitation of labor, these weren't just isolated crimes, they were the law itself. It established a baseline understanding that power and survival they trumped morality.
And that deep-seated structure of violence, it all just reaches a boiling point during the American Revolutionary War. The city descends into absolute chaos.
A total disaster. Massive fires ripped through neighborhoods. Crime rates just skyrocketed as authority dissolved. Prisons were overflowing. The sources describe it with such clarity. Survival was the only law.
And that's a key pattern, isn't it?
It's a crucial early demonstration of a pattern that defines New York. When the formal structures fail, that instinct for lawlessness and self-preservation just immediately takes over. The veneer of order is always fragile.
Which takes us right into the 19th century. And the focus shifts from, colonial greed to mass desperation. The city becomes the gateway to the American dream. Ellis Island opens. But the reality for millions of immigrants was, it was a continuation of the city's violent foundations.
The source material uses a heartbreaking metaphor. It says that New York didn't simply welcome the millions arriving, It swallowed them.
Swallowed them.
Yeah. These new arrivals, often exhausted and poor, found not opportunity but unimaginable squalor.
What did that actually look like on the ground? The sheer number of people must have just broken any attempt at urban planning or sanitation.
Oh, it did. The density was inhuman. Families, often large ones, packed into dark, airless tenements. You've heard of the Five Points neighborhood?
Infamous.
Children, some as young as 5, forced into grueling factory work just to survive. And when you combine that poverty with the complete indifference of the city, crime stops being a choice. The source argues it became an economic necessity.
You steal or you starve. And with the formal law completely unable or maybe unwilling to manage this misery, the streets were just ceded to gangs. Violence became tragically normal.
And this is where the genius of New York's corruption machine truly flowers. Who benefits from all this manageable misery?
The political machines. Tammany Hall.
Exactly.
We've all heard the name, but for you listening, what was Tammany Hall really?
Yeah.
And how did it manage to just eclipse the actual legal government?
Well, it was the dominant democratic political machine for over a century.
Yeah.
But it operated as more than a party. It
Yeah.
was a shadow government, leveraging the very desperation we just discussed.
Oh, this-
They realized that if you give a desperate family a bag of coal in the winter, or a temporary job, even just a meal, you earn their absolute loyalty and their vote.
So power didn't belong to the people. It belonged to this machine. They had the political muscle to buy and intimidate votes, control local ward bosses. But the most insidious part, and the source emphasizes this, is how they manipulated the justice system.
Absolutely. The source is unflinching here. It says, justice was for sale. This meant the police, who were beholden to Tammany appointees, were just told to look the other way.
Look the other way for certain crimes.
Certain crimes, yes,
Right.
especially if they benefited the machine or its allies. If you wanted protection for your business or to avoid prosecution, you didn't pay the city. You paid the machine.
That is the institutionalization of crime. The whole system was meticulously designed to ensure that protection, privilege, access to law, it all required payment, not just money, but loyalty, which meant votes and power. The city was run by deals made in the dark.
The desperation of the poor was the fuel, and corruption was the engine.
Moving into the early 1900s, that profound moral separation starts to manifest physically in the city's architecture. The source describes the emergence of the two New Yorks.
It's a powerful image. On one side, you have this rise of immense wealth, symbolized by the first generation of steel skyscrapers, scraping the clouds.
Yeah, on the other side.
The dark, overcrowded streets below, still rotting with the same poverty and crime inherited from the 19th century tenements. The rich, literally, looked down on the poor.
That physical height created this huge social pressure, and that pressure just exploded when the economy itself failed.
The Wall Street crash. The Great Depression. The source material captures the collapse so perfectly. Fortunes vanished instantly. Banks failed. And any fragile social order that existed, it just shattered.
And the resulting crime surge wasn't fueled by calculated desperation anymore. It was just raw, hopeless despair.
The sources recount the tragedy of that moment, noting specifically, men jumped from buildings. New York instantly became a city just consumed by hunger and anger.
And here is the critical pivot. When legitimate government fails, when the police are overwhelmed and the political machine loses its grip, because even Tammany can't conjure jobs out of thin air.
Yeah, a power vacuum forms. And that vacuum was perfectly filled by organized crime. The sources identify this era, the Prohibition and Depression years, as the true golden age of American organized crime.
And this isn't just local thugs anymore. This is a sophisticated transnational enterprise. We're talking about the establishment of the structure that would define the city for decades. The Five Families.
The scale of their power was comprehensive. They weren't just dealing in alcohol or gambling. They became a core part of the city's economic foundation.
Yeah.
They controlled vital sectors like construction and the longshoremen's unions.
So if you wanted to put up one of those gleaming new skyscrapers in Manhattan, you had to deal with the families.
You had no choice. They controlled the concrete supply, the labor, the safety inspectors. The machine politics of Tammany had sold justice. The Mafia took over the entire operation. The source highlights that nothing moved in New York without their explicit permission. And violence.
Wow.
Violence wasn't just punishment. It was a business tool. It was life or death if you crossed them.
The power of the Five Families remained entrenched for decades, but it brought the city to a crisis point in the 1970s. The sources describe this decade as the nadir, the absolute low point.
The city was nearly bankrupt. Public services were gutted, crime rates exploded, fueled by poverty and unemployment. The city was physically decaying, subways were dangerous, graffiti was everywhere. Some neighborhoods were basically war zones where the police had minimal influence.
It felt like the entire experiment of New York was about to fail. All those structural flaws, the systemic corruption, the indifference to the poor, the deep-seated lawlessness, it all seemed to be converging at once.
And that potential for catastrophic failure was revealed for the world to see during the 1977 blackout.
Right.
When the lights went out, the fragile order completely dissolved. The city just descended into pure chaos.
The accounts are just shocking. Massive looting, widespread arson, a huge surge in violent crime. That one night, the sources suggest, revealed New York's darkest face. It confirmed the fears of many who believed the city was finished, that the rot was permanent.
And what's key is the speed of it, the speed of the dissolution. That blackout showed that despite all the reforms, that underlying instinct that survival is the only law mantra from the revolution was still just waiting beneath the surface.
But New York didn't die. It began a slow, painful, decades-long process of rebuilding, only to face a completely different kind of blow in 2001.
September 11th. Terror struck right at the heart of the city's new financial power structure. The Twin Towers fell, thousands of people killed.
The source material focuses on the sheer scale of the collapse. The skyline itself was wounded, but it emphasizes that the city refused to surrender. The immediate raw pain eventually transformed into this profound display of resilience.
It's a powerful contrast. The 1977 collapse was internal, a failure of governance that led to self-destruction. The 2001 attacks were an external assault.
Yet in both cases,
The deep-seated survival instinct of New Yorkers, the very same force that drove the historical crime and lawlessness, was channeled into rebuilding.
So today we see the modern metropolis, rebuilt, shiny, dominating global finance. But as the source material argues, that past is still here. The city was stolen, broken, and rebuilt multiple times, not by ignoring crime and corruption, but by enduring them and evolving through them.
The ultimate takeaway from these sources is recognizing this continuous loop. Theft leads to exploitation, which fuels desperation, which is managed by corruption, which gets hijacked by organized crime, leading to collapse, followed by a resilient, lawless rebuild.
So the sources claim it really rings true. New York isn't just a city, it's a crime scene that never closed.
And for you, the learner, understanding these fundamental origins from that $24 transaction to the ward bosses of Tammany Hall to the absolute control of the 5 families, that gives you the true context for the modern city.
Right. You cannot celebrate the city of wealth and steel without acknowledging the streets that were allowed to rot, because those rotting streets were required to build the towers above them.
That tension is the city's defining energy, which leads us to our final thought. Given that the foundations of New York involve centuries of systemic political corruption where organized crime was always ready to fill any power vacuum, we have to ask, when a city's desperation and lawlessness are so profoundly intertwined with its economic and political structure, when does that desperation stop being a temporary problem to be solved and become its permanent defining characteristic? Something